Hello, and welcome to the next in our study of women in the Bible. And today we're looking at two women from the book of 1 Samuel, and beginning with the first chapter, a lady by the name of Hannah. Out of the materialism and ruthlessness of Israel during the period of the Judges, Hannah emerged as a woman of faith. From her home in the hills north of Jerusalem, she had travelled to Shiloh, the national place of worship. Her sadness of heart and persistence in prayer contrasted sharply with the prevalent corruption in worship led by Eli's sons. You can read about that in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verses 12 to 17. Hannah's personal life was one of despair in her childlessness, as she recoiled from Peninnah's pestering reproach. Her prayer exhibits selflessness as she pleads for a son whom she might present to God for his use. 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 11. Clearly, Hannah was loved and valued for herself by her husband, Elkanah. But even the intensity of a devoted husband's love could not penetrate her inner disquiet nor overcome her yearning for a child. Verse 8. The throbbing emotions of her despair were so evident in Hannah's prayers that the aged Eli accused her of drunkenness. But beyond her prayers and tears, a vow erupts. Hannah, in effect, makes a pact with God. She pledges to give back to him the precious life he might give to her. God honoured her bold and decisive act. Hannah's faith is rewarded, and her son is named Samuel. In Hebrew it's Shemuel. And the definition is heard by God, because she asked for him from the Lord, according to 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 20. According to custom, she probably nursed him several years, giving time for her to convey to Samuel her own spirit of deep reverence and piety, and also to knit her heart with his through maternal bonding. Nonetheless, she kept her word to the Lord. Into the defiled worship centre she placed her very young, impressionable son. Although humanly it seemed to border on foolishness, this was an act of saintly sacrifice. Her commitment was to God. Her gift was prearranged with him. With prophetic insight, she planted the next generation, just as promised. Samuel grew up to become the last judge, an outstanding and gifted prophet, and the one who would anoint the first two kings of Israel. Samuel was the pivotal spiritual leader who turned the nation toward God. His mother Hannah played her part in this spiritual awakening as she trusted God, leaving for all posterity an example of determined devotion in motherhood. The next woman that we're looking at is a lady by the name of Michal. Michal, literally meaning who is like God, was the younger daughter of Saul, and she was in love with David. Saul sought to use this fact as a snare to lure David to his death. 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 21. David accepted her love to better his position before Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 26. Saul feared David when he sent soldiers to David's house to kill him. Michal lied and schemed in order to save him. However, by helping David to escape, she lost him. Later, Michal was given away by her father to another man as wife. During the years of their separation, there is no record of David's concern for Michal or any attempt on his part to contact her. 14 years later, and 7 years after the death of Saul, David was still not king over all of Israel. As a condition of a treaty with Abner, David demanded the return of Michal in order to stabilize his position over the kingdom. Once again, Michal was used simply for political advantage. Her brother, Ishbosheth, took Michal from her sobbing husband, Paltiel, and gave her back to David. In Michal's final encounter with David, she accused him of acting unlike a king when the ark was returned to Jerusalem. 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 20. Her scorn for her husband, who also happened to be God's chosen king, resulted in the loss of her ability to bear children. The ultimate curse for any Hebrew woman. 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 23. The two accounts of these women, in some ways similar, but in so very many ways very different conclusions. The joy of Hannah, her faithfulness being rewarded, and Michal being used as a pawn in the games of men, and such damage to her life. Thanks very much for listening.